The sun had not yet risen over the coastal city of Veracruz when Luz Maria Castellanos awoke to begin her daily ritual. The gentle crackle of kindling catching fire in her humble wood-fired oven was the only sound that broke the pre-dawn silence. As the first hints of orange light filtered through her small kitchen window, her strong hands worked methodically, kneading the dough that would soon become the day's bread. Each fold and press was performed with practiced precision, her movements, both deliberate and graceful. Luz Maria was not merely baking bread. She was crafting her future with every golden roll that emerged from her oven. Each one represented a silent prayer, a hope for something beyond the confines of her modest existence. At 32 years of age, she had long accepted the likelihood of spinsterhood in a society that valued youth in its brides. Yet deep within her heart, a stubborn ember of hope refused to die. Hope for companionship, for a home of her own, perhaps even for love. Her modest bakery had sustained her since her parents' passing 5 years prior, but the solitude of her days had grown increasingly difficult to bear. The walls of her small home seemed to inch closer with each passing season, and the emptiness of her evenings echoed with unspoken longings. When the courier arrived later that morning, his weathered face betrayed no hint of the letter's significance. "From a certain hacendado in Santa Clara del Llano," he said simply, extending the plain envelope toward her flour-dusted hands. Luz Maria accepted it with measured composure, though her heart quickened beneath her apron. That evening, by the flickering light of a single candle, she read the words that would alter the course of her life. The letter, penned in a precise but unremarkable hand, contained an offer of marriage by correspondence from one Bruno Castañeda, a widowed landowner seeking a practical arrangement. He offered shelter and his name, nothing more. There was no mention of love, no romantic promises, only the pragmatic proposal of a man who needed a mother for his daughters and a woman to manage his household. "I understand you are a woman of good character and practical skills," he had written. "I seek not romance but respectability, not passion but peace. If these terms are agreeable, you may reply with your acceptance." For 3 days, Luz Maria carried the letter in her apron pocket, removing it periodically to reread its sparse contents. On the 4th day, she composed her reply. "Señor Castañeda, I accept your terms with clear eyes and an honest heart. I bring no dowry but my good name, my skilled hands, and my willingness to care for your home and children. I ask only for respect and the opportunity to build a life of dignity. I shall arrive within the month." The weeks that followed passed in a whirlwind of preparation. She sold her iron stove, the embroidered linens inherited from her grandmother, and a pair of silver earrings, her sole piece of jewelry, to fund her journey. Her few possessions, a handmade quilt, 2 notebooks filled with recipes and household remedies, 3 modest dresses, and her baking tools, were carefully packed into a wooden chest that had once belonged to her father. On her final morning, in Veracruz, as the first steamship whistle shattered the port's calm, Luz Maria stood on the dock, her chest at her feet and her resolve firmly in place. The salty breeze caught at her carefully pinned hair as she whispered the words that would become her silent mantra in the days to come. "I did not come into the world to be small for anyone." The journey inland was arduous. 2 days by steam, engined through landscapes that transformed from coastal plains to rolling highlands. As the train cut through unfamiliar terrain, Luz Maria rehearsed what she might say upon meeting her future husband. Would he be kind? Would his daughters accept her? What would it mean to be the mistress of a hacienda after years of independence? When the train finally pulled into the station at Santa Clara del Llano, the skies had darkened to a leaden gray, and a fine, persistent drizzle shrouded the platform in mist. Luz Maria descended the metal steps expecting, if not a warm welcome, then at least the courtesy of a proper greeting from her intended husband. Instead, a single servant awaited her, a thin man whose impatient expression suggested that retrieving her was an unwelcome interruption to his day. He barely acknowledged her presence as he gestured toward her chest. "I am to take your belongings to the carriage," he said flatly. "The señor will arrive shortly." Luz Maria nodded, straightening her travel-worn dress and adjusting her hat. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The platform gradually emptied as other travelers departed with their waiting families. Only Luz Maria remained, standing as straight as a cypress tree, despite the growing dampness of her clothes and the uncertainty gnawing at her confidence. Finally, a figure appeared through the mist, a tall man with a severe countenance, dressed in the unmistakable attire of a wealthy landowner. This, then, was Bruno Castañeda. He approached with measured steps, his eyes appraising her with unconcealed disappointment. Luz Maria extended her hand, summoning a dignified smile. "Señor Castañeda, I am Luz Maria." Before she could complete her introduction, he cut her off with a dismissive gesture. His gaze traveled from her head to her feet, lingering uncomfortably on her considerable height. She stood nearly as tall as he did, before his mouth tightened into a thin line of displeasure. "This isn't what I expected," he stated coldly. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Luz Maria standing alone in the drizzle, her outstretched hand slowly falling to her side. The servant shifted uncomfortably. "The señor has instructed me to provide you with funds for return passage. He regrets the inconvenience." In that moment, surrounded by curious stares from lingering bystanders, the horrifying truth crystallized. She had been rejected. Discarded like refuse. The journey, her preparations, her hopes, all rendered meaningless by a man's superficial judgment, because she was too tall, too imposing, not diminutive and deferential as he had evidently imagined in his correspondence. Humiliation washed over her in waves, threatening to drown her hard-won composure. But something deeper than pride kept her spine straight and her chin lifted. It was dignity, the unshakable knowledge of her own worth that had sustained her through orphanhood and solitude. "I will not be returning to Veracruz," she informed the servant quietly. "Please direct me to suitable lodgings in town." The man hesitated, clearly unprepared for this response. "Señorita, there is no hotel in Santa Clara. Only Don Mateo's boarding house, and it's not for respectable ladies." "Then where might I find this Don Mateo?" With reluctant directions from the servant, Luz Maria gathered her chest and made her way through the unfamiliar streets of Santa Clara del Llano. The town was smaller than she had imagined, a cluster of stone buildings surrounding a modest plaza with the imposing silhouette of Hacienda San Remigio visible on the distant hillside. Don Mateo's establishment proved to be an apothecary, rather than a proper boarding house. A narrow storefront, filled with the competing scents of alcohol, dried herbs, and medicinal compounds. The proprietor himself, an elderly man with kind eyes set in a weathered face, listened to her predicament without judgment. "I have a small room in the attic," he offered. "It's simple, but clean. You may stay until you find more suitable arrangements." "I can pay," Luz Maria assured him, reaching for the return fare she had been given. Don Mateo waved away her offer. "Later. First you must rest. Tomorrow is soon enough to worry about what comes next." The attic room was indeed small, barely large enough for a narrow bed and her wooden chest. But the sloped ceiling created a sense of shelter that Luz Maria found unexpectedly comforting. That night, as rain drummed against the roof tiles, mere inches above her head, she allowed herself a moment of private grief. Not for the loss of Bruno Castañeda, a stranger who had proven himself unworthy of her consideration, but for the death of the future she had imagined during those long train journeys. Morning brought clarity and purpose. If she could not be a wife, she would return to what she knew best. In Don Mateo's back kitchen, with his bemused permission, she rekindled the wood-fired oven and mixed the first batch of dough with borrowed ingredients. By midday, the scent of fresh bread had drawn curious onlookers to the apothecary. Don Mateo, recognizing an opportunity, suggested she sell her goods from a small table in the plaza. By sunset, She had earned enough to repay his kindness and secure her room for another week. Days stretched into weeks as Luz Maria established herself in the local market. Each morning, she rose before dawn to prepare her dough, and each day she faced the whispers and stares of the townspeople. "She's the one they rejected at the hacienda," they murmured as she passed. "Too tall, they say. Unsuitable." Luz Maria absorbed these comments with outward serenity, though each barb stung anew. At her market stall, she served each customer with the same dignified courtesy, regardless of whether they purchased her goods out of genuine appreciation or mere curiosity. And each evening, as she covered her remaining rolls as if protecting precious treasures, she silently affirmed her resilience. "I am still here." On the 23rd day of her unexpected residence in Santa Clara del Llano, a silent page delivered a brief, unsigned note to Don Mateo's shop. The message, written in an elegant feminine hand on fine stationery, requested her presence at Hacienda San Remigio the following morning. Hope and apprehension warred within her as she traveled by solitary carriage through vast dusty fields toward the grand estate. Had Bruno Castañeda reconsidered? She dismissed the thought immediately. Her pride would never permit such a reconciliation, not after such humiliation. Yet curiosity compelled her forward. The hacienda was even more imposing up close. A sprawling structure of stone and stucco with wrought iron balconies and a central courtyard visible through massive wooden gates. A maid ushered her through echo-filled halls to a sunlit drawing room where an elegant older woman awaited. "I am Doña Brígida Castañeda," the woman announced without preamble. "Bruno's aunt and guardian to his daughter since their mothers. Passing. Are you familiar with the education of young ladies?" Luz Maria, caught off guard by this unexpected line of questioning, gathered her thoughts. "I received schooling at the convent in Veracruz until I was 16. I am literate in Spanish and have basic knowledge of Latin. I can teach arithmetic, geography, and proper deportment." Doña Brígida nodded approvingly. "My nieces require a governess. Their previous instructor returned to Spain last month, and suitable replacements are scarce in these rural parts." Before Luz Maria could respond, 2 young girls entered the room, one perhaps 12 years old with her father's serious expression, the other no more than 8, with curious eyes that darted nervously between the adults. "Josefina and Leonor," Doña Brígida introduced them. "Meet Señorita Castellanos. She may become your new teacher." The position offered was clear: governess, not wife, a role of servitude rather than partnership. Yet as Luz Maria observed the reserved grace of Josefina and the eager curiosity of little Leonor, something stirred within her, a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. "I accept the position," she said, meeting Doña Brígida's evaluating gaze without flinching. "When shall I begin?" The next morning found Luz Maria settled at a small desk in the hacienda's library, her few possessions arranged in a modest chamber adjacent to the nursery. Her duties were clearly outlined: lessons in the morning, supervised recreation in the afternoon, and assistance with correspondence or needlework in the evenings. Of Bruno Castañeda, she saw little. He seemed to deliberately avoid the areas of the house where she conducted lessons, departing early each morning to oversee the fields, and returning only after the girls had retired for the night. On the rare occasions when they passed in corridors or shared space at the dinner table, he acknowledged her with nothing more than a curt nod. This arrangement suited Luz Maria well enough. She threw herself into her teaching duties with genuine enthusiasm, finding unexpected joy in Josefina's quick mind and Leonor's creative spirit. Together, they studied geography by drawing maps of imaginary kingdoms, practiced arithmetic by calculating the trajectories of comets, and improved their elocution by staging dramatic readings of poetry. Yet beneath the growing comfort of this new routine lurked persistent undercurrents of tension. Servants exchanged furtive glances whenever Luz Maria crossed their path. At church gatherings and during social calls, she became aware of whispered conversations that ceased abruptly upon her approach. The source of this discomfort soon became clear. Doña Tadea Villalobos, a widow whose estate bordered San Remigio, had taken it upon herself to sow insinuations about Luz Maria's character and intentions. How curious that Bruno should install his rejected bride as governess to his daughters, she remarked loudly after Sunday Mass. One wonders what hold she might have over him. Such comments, delivered with false sweetness and calculated timing, circulated through the community like poison. Some servants began to treat Luz Maria with barely concealed contempt, while others offered awkward gestures of support. Through it all, Luz Maria maintained her dignity, focusing on her duties to Josefina and Leonor. She found unexpected allies in Doña Brigida, who dismissed the gossip with aristocratic disdain, and in Don Mateo, who continued to purchase her bread for his shop, despite the potential damage to his reputation. The greatest test of her resilience came some 2 months after her arrival at San Remigio. During a boundary inspection, Don Prudencio Villalobos, Doña Tadea's son and heir, made a point of insulting Luz Maria within earshot of the field workers. "When you leave your gates open," he sneered to Bruno, "even what you return comes back, though it be damaged goods." The insult hung heavy in the air. The workers lowered their eyes, uncomfortable witnesses to her humiliation. Luz Maria's heart sank as she realized how thoroughly her reputation had been tarnished. But then, from the shadowed doorway of the equipment shed, Bruno Castañeda stepped forward. His expression was thunderous as he faced Don Prudencio. "This house, no lady is insulted," he stated, his voice quiet but carrying unmistakable authority. "Not by guests, not by neighbors, and certainly not by those who fancy themselves gentlemen while behaving like churlish boys." A hush fell over the assembled workers. Don Prudencio's face flushed with anger, but something in Bruno's steady gaze prevented him from escalating the confrontation. With a stiff bow, he remounted his horse and departed. In the silence that followed, Luz Maria met Bruno's eyes for the first time since that terrible day at the station. What she saw there was not attraction or even apology, but something equally valuable: respect. In that moment, her status shifted from outcast to defended, her dignity affirmed by the very man who had once rejected her. The incident marked a subtle turning point in her position at San Remigio. The whispers didn't cease entirely, but they lost much of their sting. The servants' attitudes softened, and gradually, Luz Maria began to find moments of genuine belonging amidst the daily routines of the hacienda. One such moment came during an afternoon walk with Leonor, whose curiosity had led them beyond their usual garden paths to a vine-covered gate near the family chapel. "What lies beyond there?" the child asked, pointing to the rusted hinges barely visible beneath tangled greenery. Together, they pushed through the overgrowth to discover a forgotten garden. Once formal beds, now wild with weeds, stone pathways, cracked and obscured, a small fountain choked with leaves and debris. "It was my mother's garden," Josefina explained, having followed them unnoticed. "No one has tended it since she died." Luz Maria surveyed the neglected space, seeing beyond its current state to the beauty that once existed and could exist again. "Perhaps," she suggested gently, "we might restore it as a way to honor her memory." The project became a labor of love for Luz Maria and the girls. Each afternoon, they cleared a little more ground, identified surviving plants, and planned new plantings. Unknown to them, Bruno often watched their progress from the mansion's edge, his expression unreadable as memories of his late wife resurfaced. As spring advanced, the garden's transformation mirrored subtle changes within the household. Josefina began to seek Luz Maria's guidance beyond formal lessons, confiding dreams of someday managing the hacienda accounts. Leonor blossomed under her attention, her natural exuberance channeled into creative pursuits. Even Doña Brigida thawed, occasionally joining them for evening readings in the library. Bruno remained distant, though his brief interactions with Luz Maria grew gradually less strained. He approved her requests for garden supplies without question and acknowledged her educational progress reports with increasing interest. This fragile harmony was shattered one stormy afternoon by the arrival of an anonymous letter. Perfumed and written in an affected hand, it accused Luz Maria of manipulating Bruno and his daughters for financial gain, suggesting improper behavior and questionable motives. The letter circulated rapidly, fanned by Doña Tadea's malicious enthusiasm. Gossip spread faster than the gathering thunderclouds, threatening to undo all the goodwill Luz Maria had painstakingly built. As rain lashed the hacienda windows, Bruno summoned every servant, neighbor, and Doña Tadea herself to the main hall. Standing beside Luz Maria, who maintained her composure despite the public humiliation, he held up the offending letter. "Who among you believes these accusations?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the nervous murmurs. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of rain against the tiles. Then, unexpectedly, Josefina stepped forward. With remarkable poise for a 12-year-old, she pointed to the distinctive loops and flourishes of the handwriting. "That is Doña Tadea's script," she stated clearly. "She sent my quinceañera invitation in the same hand." All eyes turned to the widow, whose face mottled with rage and embarrassment. Before she could defend herself, Bruno spoke again. "Since my wife's passing, this household has known little joy. Señorita Castellanos has restored light and learning to these halls. She has nurtured my daughters' minds and spirits with remarkable care. I will not allow her good name to be tarnished by jealousy and spite." His public defense, delivered with quiet intensity as thunder crashed overhead, effectively silenced the whispers. Doña Tadea departed in humiliated fury, and the assembled staff dispersed with new respect for both their employer and the governess, who had endured so much with such grace. In the weeks that followed, a subtle shift occurred in Bruno's behavior toward Luz Maria. He began to seek her company during evening hours, initially under the pretext of discussing his daughter's education, but gradually venturing into more personal conversations about books they had read, memories of their respective childhoods, hopes for the hacienda's future. Luz Maria responded with cautious openness, neither seeking nor avoiding these interactions. She had long since abandoned romantic notions about Bruno Castañeda, yet she found herself appreciating his thoughtful intelligence and dry humor. He was not the man she had imagined from his letters, but neither was he the cold-hearted tyrant who had dismissed her at the station. He was simply a man, flawed, complex, capable of both cruelty and kindness. As summer ripened into harvest season, Bruno announced his intention to revive an old tradition, the harvest ball that had once been an annual celebration at San Remigio, before his wife's illness had ended such festivities. The announcement sent ripples of excitement through the household and surrounding community. Villagers hung lanterns in anticipation. Doña Brigida supervised the pressing of linen stored since the last such event. Field workers polished the courtyard stones in preparation for dancing under the stars. Luz Maria assisted discreetly, with preparations, never presuming that she would participate as a guest rather than a servant. She arranged centerpieces of late summer blooms, directed the placement of candelabras, and helped Josefina and Leonor select appropriate finery for their first formal event. On the evening of the ball, as she fastened the buttons of Leonor's new dress, the little girl asked innocently, "Aren't you going to dress for the dance, Luz Maria?" Before she could formulate a gentle refusal, Doña Brigida appeared in the doorway, holding a gown of deep copper silk. "This was mine many years ago," the older woman explained. "I believe it will suit your height and coloring." The gesture, unexpected and touching, left Luz Maria momentarily speechless. With the girl's enthusiastic encouragement, she accepted the dress and the implicit invitation it represented. As twilight deepened into evening, the first strains of violin music drifted across the lantern-lit patio. Guests in their finery circulated beneath swaying paper lanterns, exclaiming over the transformation of San Remigio from somber estate to festive gathering place. Luz Maria remained at the periphery, content to observe the reunion of neighbors and friends, the proud posture of Josefina as she greeted guests like a true señorita, the delighted twirls of Leonor amidst the dancers. It was there, in the shadow of a flowering jacaranda, that Bruno found her. Without preamble, he extended his hand in invitation. "Will you honor me with this dance, Luz Maria?" The use of her given name, a first in their acquaintance, did not escape her notice. Nor did the genuine warmth in his expression as he awaited her response. With a slight nod, she placed her hand in his and allowed him to lead her into the circle of dancers. Their waltz was tentative at first, both hyper-aware of curious glances from the assembled guests. Yet as the music swelled, something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of the journey that had brought them to this unexpected moment. Their joined hands, the respectful distance maintained between their bodies, the careful steps they took together, all spoke more eloquently than words of a new understanding. Not romance, perhaps, but something equally precious, mutual respect, hard-won and genuine. As autumn painted the hills surrounding Santa Clara del Llano in russet and gold, Bruno sought a private audience with Luz Maria in the restored garden where chrysanthemums now bloomed in orderly beds. "I have behaved unconscionably toward you," he began without preamble. "My rejection at the station was based on the shallowest of judgments and revealed the worst of my character. You deserved better then, and you deserve better now." Luz Maria regarded him steadily, neither encouraging nor discouraging his evident discomfort. "I do not presume to offer what was once withdrawn," he continued carefully, "but I wish you to know that I hold you in the highest esteem, not only as my daughter's teacher, but as a woman of extraordinary character and grace. Whatever your future plans may be, I hope that San Remigio might remain your home for as long as you wish it so." His words, clearly rehearsed yet sincerely delivered, hung in the crisp air between them. Luz Maria considered her response with care, conscious of all that had transpired since that rainy afternoon at the station. "I came to Santa Clara seeking security and found humiliation," she said at last. "Yet, through that ordeal, I discovered my own strength. I learned that dignity cannot be bestowed or withdrawn by another. It is the core of one's being, unassailable by circumstance." She paused, noting how intently he listened. So different from the dismissive man who had once judged her unsuitable at a glance. "I have come to care deeply for Josefina and Leonor," she continued. "Their well-being matters to me beyond the bounds of employment. As for you, Bruno, I see now the man behind the harsh judgment, the father beneath the hacendado. I cannot say what the future holds, but I am no longer the woman who would accept marriage by correspondence out of desperation. Nor would I want you to be," he replied softly. "If, and I say if with all humility, you should ever consider joining our lives more permanently, it would be as equals. Not as master and servant, not as benefactor and recipient, but as partners, in the truest sense." The proposal, for that was what it was, remained unanswered that day. Luz Maria requested time for consideration, not out of coyness, but from genuine need for reflection. Bruno honored this request with patient understanding, neither pressing for resolution nor withdrawing the offer. Weeks passed in which their relationship developed along new lines. Honest conversations, shared responsibilities for the girls, education, mutual consultation on household matters. The hierarchical boundaries between them dissolved gradually, replaced by a companionship based on genuine appreciation of each other's strengths. When Luz Maria finally gave her answer, it came without fanfare or dramatic declaration. During an evening walk through the garden she had restored, she simply linked her arm through Bruno's and said, "Yes, I believe we could build something worthwhile together." Their wedding, held in the small stone chapel framed by flowering jacarandas, reflected the authentic nature of their union. Luz Maria wore a simple gown of fine linen rather than elaborate satin. Bruno stood at the altar solemn and respectful, without pretense or performance. Their vows, spoken in unadorned sincerity, promised not fairy tale romance but enduring respect, patient understanding, and unwavering care. Josefina and Leonor participated, with unguarded delight, scattering petals along the aisle and standing proudly beside their father and new mother. Quiet applause rippled through the congregation, a community that had witnessed Luz Maria's journey from rejected bride to respected matriarch. Many who had once whispered behind her back now offered genuine congratulations, respect having overcome prejudice. Hand in hand, Bruno and Luz Maria exited the chapel to a path of softly falling blossoms. A modest feast beneath the ancient trees sealed their union in communal celebration, not an ostentatious display of wealth, but a genuine sharing of joy. 5 years later, Hacienda San Remigio flourished under their joint stewardship. Fields stretched green and abundant across the valley. Laughter echoed through halls once shrouded in mourning. Little Mateo, their youngest child at 3 years old, raced beneath the jacaranda's purple canopy, his gleeful shouts mingling with birdsong. Josefina, now 17, and possessed of her father's business acumen, tempered by Luz Maria's compassion, taught reading and writing to neighborhood children each afternoon. Leonor, blossoming into adolescence, dreamed of founding her own school in the village and inspired local girls with her ambitious plans. Bruno tended the library that had once been devoted exclusively to his late wife's memory, now a haven of shared intellectual pursuits and family gatherings. He had grown softer in some ways, firmer in others, less concerned with superficial proprieties, more invested in genuine connections with those around him. Luz Maria's bakery in the plaza had become famous throughout the region, not only for its exceptional bread, but for its proprietor's gifts of wisdom and comfort. Local wisdom held that her conscience could heal both hunger and heartache. Her advice, offered sparingly but kindly, had guided many through difficult decisions. On a perfect autumn afternoon, as golden light filtered through the trees, the family walked together along the boundaries of their land, not to mark ownership, but to give thanks for the abundance it provided. Bruno and Luz Maria lingered behind the children, their hands loosely linked in the comfortable manner of those who no longer need constant reassurance of affection. "Do you ever think about that day at the station?" he asked quietly. "Do you ever regret accepting my second proposal after such a beginning?" Luz Maria considered his question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "I think of it not with regret, but with gratitude," she answered finally. "Had you not rejected me then, we might never have found our way to this truth. That love built on respect and tested by adversity grows stronger roots than any founded on convenience or convention." Beneath the blooming branches, surrounded by the family they had forged through difficulty and joy, they stood as living proof that dignity, kindness, and true partnership could transform even the most unpromising soil into fertile ground for love.